The amazing thing about Freak Out was that there was nothing quite like it in rock and roll at the time. It was really simultaneously crude and ugly and incredibly sophisticated. And there was, I mean, the Beatles were funny, but there was nothing with the kind of sneer that you could feel in the music of Frank Zappa.
Do you think that my pants are too tight? Do you think that I'm creepy? Better look around before you say you don't care. Shut your fucking mouth about the length of my hair. How would you survive if you were alive, shitty little person?
Although the Mothers' sound could only have come from LA, it wasn't until they left there in 1967 to take up a 6-month residency at the Garrick Theatre in New York that they began to find their audience.
We were never that popular in Los Angeles because even compared to New York, Los Angeles is a very conforming community. It just seemed to me that at that time, San Francisco was more conformist, Los Angeles a little bit less. When we moved to New York, there was virtually no scene at all. There was no long-haired anything there. People looked at us like we were from Venus. And by the time a scene did finally erupt in New York City, it was much more interesting because it had ethnic diversity, it had cultural diversity because of all the different parts of the city where there were concrete artistic things going on. There were things happening that were experimental, not necessarily wonderful, but at least experimental. People trying to do something that was different.
It was an interesting time, but the audiences were really into it. They loved it. They would line up around the block to come in night after night just to see what kind of bizarre crap we'd come up with. Fuzzy dice, bongo flies, my ship of love, ready to attack.
It's not like you would go on stage and there would be a sea of people with long hair all decked out like in 60s fashion, like the special Time Warner version of the 60s. They weren't like that. There were people who were from the suburbs who were coming to this concert out of curiosity, weren't really part of any kind of a scene except their local community, and basically stood there with their mouths open, just going, duh. Some of them decided that they would become hippies, or some would become freaks, some would become mass murderers, whatever it was. But when they were there, basically it was duh.
Well, I was probably one of those rather stiff people from the suburbs. I think some of us did understand, and we kept coming back for more and more and more. And I remember being very upset when they finally finished their stint at the Garrick Theatre and went back to L.A. I felt as if the real, heart had gone out of New York City, and I had to get back on with my conservatory music training life, which seemed very dull after this. One never knew what to expect. There were some nights that you just heard pure music, and other nights Motorhead would be talking about fixing his car with Jim Black's drum beat in the background. Sometimes Frank would just sit in a chair and glower at the audience. Sometimes there were more people on stage than there were in the audience. And because of that, Frank even got to know some of us by name. There were so few hardcore Mothers freaks then that we were all very noticeable to him. I remember Stravinsky being played. I remember droning music going on for ages, and then in the middle of all of that, the song that then became Oh No, I Don't Believe It, sort of breaking through the clouds. And I mean, it just shocked me how anything could be so beautiful, and how such beautiful music could come out of such bizarre-looking people.
You say love is all we need, you say with your love you can change all of the fools, all of the hate. I think you're probably out to lunch.
But having established the Mothers as one of the most formidable and original bands of the 60s, now with a huge following in Europe as well as the United States, Zappa played a characteristic hand. After 5 years and 7 albums, he suddenly disbanded the group.
It was getting to the point that I think Frank wasn't going the direction he wanted to, and wasn't being as creative as he wanted to. So that's basically how we disbanded. He just got tired and said, hey guys, let's go out into other groups, let's infiltrate other bands, and let's get some fresh ideas. You know, you guys come back, maybe we'll get together 3 or 4 years down the line, bring in your ideas from the groups you have, and let's get back together and do something with it. But it just never happened. The original band was a lot of fun, but we weren't super talented musicians. I mean, we couldn't read classical things. Everybody was good in their own field, but we weren't up to what Frank really wanted, I don't think.
Zappa surprised his large following with the relatively smooth style of Hot Rats, the first album released under his own name. It was mostly instrumental, featuring extended sax, violin and guitar solos, which were melodically accessible as well as musically sophisticated.
It was a major flop in the United States, but for some reason became a top 10 record in England and Holland, and is regarded nostalgically in those places. But the revolutionary thing about that album was the quantity and texture of the overdubbing that was being done on it. 16-track recording was a brand new medium. The 16-track machine that we recorded that album on was practically a prototype. It was as large as that fireplace. This monstro machine.
Standing on the porch of the little hotel, floated in the lobby, love the way I sell my feet, my racks, my cats, my kids.
Hot Rats was completely free of the Dada disruptiveness that had characterised the Mothers albums. The one vocal track, Willie the Pimp, was sung by an old high school chum, Captain Beefheart. Then, just when a solo career looked likely, Zappa reformed the Mothers, but with a different lineup, including 2 singers brought in from the 60s teen group The Turtles. For the new group, he invented a new theatrical style. The old surrealism was played down in favour of increasingly bawdy slapstick humour.
Hi, friends! Did you ever consider the possibility that your penis, or in the case of many dignified ladies, that the size of the titties themselves might provide elements of subconscious tension? Yes, weird, twisted anxieties that could force a person to have to become a politician, hurrah! A policeman, yes! A Jesuit monk,
Dominus vobiscum et cum spiritus.
A rock and roll guitar player.
200 Motels, a scatological on-the-road documentary film and record, was Zappa's Heaven's Gate. It cost a lot of money and it met with a mixed critical reception. But the film was important because it showed Zappa's first collaboration with a classical orchestra. Through the 70s, Zappa the composer and Zappa the rock performer developed an easy coexistence. When he played live, it was with a band who could perform both complicated instrumentals and salacious songs with driving rhythms.
In a little white box that I could sell uptown, but by myself I wouldn't have no boss, 'cause I'd be raising my lonely dental floss.
Let me tell you, Frank was leading the band from every possible aspect and angle and vantage point. Well, he had a series of hand signals. And then, body language is pretty important, too. We all had our eyes on Frank all the time. And you had to, because you never knew what was going to happen. I mean, in the middle of doing something that was very much expected and rehearsed, he could just turn around and do something. He could gesture a certain way or make a face or interject something to the microphone, just say something, or start some banter with, whichever lead singer happened to be there, and the whole concert would take a completely different turn. It was free in that way. It was incredibly tight, but it was free as well. It's an interesting balance.
Moonlighty night. Help me out, Ruth. Tweezer Glen. And then I'd get a cup of coffee and give my foot a push. Just me and the pygmy pony over by the dental floss bush. And then I might just jump back on and ride like a cowboy into the dawn to Montana. Into Montana soon. Moving to Montana soon.
The bottom line with Frank was that he wanted to and needed to get the best that he could from everyone. That was of paramount importance to him, and I think that's why he got such really extraordinary results. He saw what each of us could do, and he wouldn't settle for anything less than that.
For me, it was always more interesting to encounter a musician who had a unique ability, find a way to showcase that, and build that unusual skill into the composition, so that forever and ever afterward that composition would be stamped with the personality of the person who was there when the composition was created.
He has a really incredible insight, sort of an intuition about musicians. I mean, I sat in a room and watched him go through, hordes of musicians, bass players, and we were doing auditions. And he just seems to know, he seems to be able to, get what you're about musically and take that and take it to the top of your ability. Like I say, Frank was the band leader, and I was a musician. I was very fortunate because I loved his music. I remember he said on the phone to me after he first heard me play, he goes, "I think you're great. I'd like to, try you out for the band." He goes, "But how do I know that you won't be a miserable son of a bitch having to play my music?" I was the tool of the composer.